What Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that the grandest stage of the British social season has officially become her public execution ground. At the very gates of the royal box at Ascot, a decorated security detail politely but firmly stepped into the path of her immediate family, redirecting them away from the private enclosure and toward the public concourse. In less than 48 hours, a meticulously planned demonstration of dynastic dominance collapsed into a masterclass of institutional humiliation. The illusion of her absolute power, cultivated through decades of ruthless social climbing, dissolved with a single, quiet, administrative directive. This is the story of a secret power grab executed under the guise of royal modernization, a paper trail uncovered by the ultimate enforcers of crown discipline, and the silent, bloodless retaliation that left the Queen Consort completely isolated. In this video, we will unpack how Princess Anne and Prince William intercepted a covert rewrite of palace protocol, how they weaponized the strict rules of the elite British establishment, and the devastating moment Camilla realized that despite the crown on her head, she actually owns absolutely nothing within the sovereign estate. To fully grasp the magnitude of this sudden collapse, we must first look at the immense heights of the illusion Camilla spent 3 decades constructing. For 30 years, her journey was defined by a patient, deeply calculated movement from the shadows of a historic public scandal to the absolute center of the British monarchy. She had successfully navigated the deepest waters of public hostility, weathering the resentment of a nation, and slowly working to minimize the enduring legacy of Princess Diana. With a sophisticated public relations machine operating tirelessly behind her, she rebranded herself from the most controversial woman in Britain into an indispensable royal asset, culminating in her ultimate triumph at the coronation. Following that historic ceremony, her confidence grew into a highly visible display of untouchable authority. She quietly dropped the word consort from her official title, overriding the explicit, written boundaries that had been carefully laid out by the late Queen Elizabeth II. She began parading her non-royal children front and center during major state events, signaling to the world that a new regime had arrived. King Charles appeared completely dependent on her presence, relying on her as an emotional anchor and a palace gatekeeper who controlled access to his time and energy. She operated with the breezy confidence of a woman who thought she had successfully conquered the monarchy, assuming her position was unassailable and insulated by the deep devotion of a king, who had repeatedly sacrificed his own public standing just to place her on the throne. But absolute power breeds a very specific kind of blindness to the rigid realities of the institution, masking a deep and growing sense of commercial desperation. Camilla knows the brutal truth of the Windsor family architecture better than anyone she understands, that her position, her wealth, and her lavish lifestyle are entirely dependent on the heartbeat of one man. Should King Charles pass away, her legal standing and her executive influence evaporate overnight, reducing her to a ceremonial widow with no constitutional power. Driven by this existential ticking clock, she initiated her most daring and fatal secret power grab yet, attempting to secure a permanent social and financial foothold for her own descendants before her window of opportunity closed forever. The opportunity presented itself with the arrival of the high-profile summer social season, a period where visual presence in the royal enclosures carries immense public and commercial currency. Behind the scenes, what looked like a routine administrative update regarding guest lists and seating arrangements was actually a total, unauthorized dismantling of the established royal hierarchy. Camilla quietly instructed her private office to adjust the master registries for the country's premier events, systematically removing Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie from the official guest lists for both the Chelsea Flower Show and the prestigious Royal Ascot. Her strategic objective was entirely transparent. She sought to isolate the true bloodline, princesses, push them into social obscurity, and fill the vacant, highly coveted seats in the royal box with her own non-royal children and close commercial allies. It was a breathtaking act of institutional overreach, a calculated gamble to create a shadow court of loyalists who would retain a permanent foothold inside the palace's most exclusive circles long after the current reign ends. Camilla believed that by using subtle administrative maneuvers and bypassing the standard advisory boards, she could quietly slip these guest alterations through the system while the rest of the family was distracted by the king's ongoing medical treatments and demanding schedule. She assumed that her movements were entirely hidden in the shadows of palace bureaucracy, completely confident that no one would dare challenge a directive coming from the private office of the Queen. However, she fundamentally underestimated the silent forensic watchfulness of Prince William and Princess Anne, who view themselves as the permanent unyielding guardians of the Crown's integrity. The Prince of Wales does not view the royal social calendar as mere entertainment. He reads the ledgers, examines the registries, and controls the vast financial arteries of the working monarchy as the true executive force behind the scenes. When the updated guest lists for the royal box crossed the desks of senior estate controllers, the sudden and unexplained omission of the bloodline princesses immediately triggered a deeper internal review. Princess Anne, long recognized as the chief institutional enforcer and the fierce protector of her late mother's strict standards, identified the pattern of exploitation instantly. Together with William, they traced a complex paper trail that revealed Camilla's covert efforts to alter internal palace traditions for the personal and social elevation of her own family. For William, this was not just a violation of administrative protocol, it was a profound moral outrage. He saw it as a direct assault on the dignity of the direct line of succession, a brazen attempt to hijack the royal apparatus while his wife, Princess Catherine, continued to navigate her own severe health challenges with quiet, uncomplaining sacrifice and untouchable grace. The institutional retaliation that followed was not carried out with a loud, public confrontation or an emotional shouting match in a drawing room. There were no dramatic leaks to the tabloids or open family feuds. Instead, William and Princess Anne chose to execute a cold, bloodless masterclass in weaponized restraint, using the very system Camilla tried to manipulate to destroy her plan completely. They turned to the long-standing rigid bylaws of the Royal Jockey Club and the sovereign's private estate management, frameworks where the authority of the immediate heir and the senior bloodline trustees remains absolute and unquestionable. Working in absolute synchronization, William and Anne quietly issued a series of counter-directives that completely overrode the orders from Camilla's private office. The guest lists for the royal box were rewritten overnight, restoring Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie to their rightful positions of prominence at the absolute center of the frame. Simultaneously, the security clearances and access passes for Camilla's family members were quietly downgraded, restricting them from the private staging areas and premier enclosures reserved for working royals. The trap had snapped shut with perfect, terrifying forensic discipline executed without a single raised voice or public comment. The true magnitude of this institutional reckoning became undeniable on the opening day of the event. As Camilla's inner circle arrived in their finest attire, expecting to walk through the main entrance of the royal box as the new rulers of the social landscape, they were met with the devastating reality of a closed door. They were politely but firmly turned away by officials operating under direct orders from the future king, forced to endure the ultimate visual humiliation of a public redirection. Panicked and utterly defeated, Camilla retreated behind closed doors, reaching out to the one man she believed could save her from this sudden isolation. She made the urgent phone call to King Charles, expecting him to overrule his son and silence his sister. But as the line connected, she was met not with royal outrage, but with a hollow, devastating silence that signaled the permanent end of her empire. The phone call from the private quarters of Ascot lasted less than 3 minutes, but it contained the psychological climax of a 30-year campaign for supremacy. When Queen Camilla frantically detailed the locked gates, the revoked access passes, and the staggering visual humiliation her family had just endured on the public concourse, she fully expected the sovereign to rage. She expected the man who had torn his own family apart to marry her, the man who had spent decades demanding that the institution bow to her presence to immediately summon his son and demand strict compliance. Instead, what she heard on the other end of the line was a hollow, devastating silence. Charles did not yell. He did not promise retribution against the Prince of Wales. He simply offered a quiet, defeated sigh, acknowledging that the enforcement of the royal enclosure was now operating under the absolute authority of his heir. That is where the story changes forever. For decades, Camilla had operated under the absolute certainty that King Charles would burn the world down to protect her from consequence. But in that crushing moment of silence, the illusion of her absolute power completely evaporated. She realized that Charles is a king entirely constrained by the reality of his own mortality and the surging, undeniable institutional authority of Prince William. Confronted with forensic evidence of a covert power grab that threatened to destabilize the social architecture of the reign, Charles recognized that defending Camilla's non-royal family would mean declaring a catastrophic public war on his own successor. His silence was not just a lack of action, it was the ultimate emotional betrayal. It was a calculated sovereign decision to yield to the Iron Princess and the Prince of Wales, choosing the survival of the crown over the ego of his wife. This devastating refusal to intervene brings us to the staggering reality of Camilla's commercial desperation. When we look at the British monarchy from the outside, we see historic palaces, priceless diamonds, and sweeping displays of deference. But the underlying truth of the institution is a strict, unforgiving corporate hierarchy based entirely on blood and constitutional precedent. Camilla's personal wealth, her structural influence, and her family's proximity to royal privilege are all entirely dependent on a legal status that vanishes the second the reign ends. She owns no major estates. She does not control the Duchy of Cornwall. She possesses no constitutional power to grant permanent royal status to her children. Without Charles actively forcing the doors open for them, her descendants are immediately reduced to exactly what they have always been: private citizens wearing expensive clothes entirely devoid of any institutional mandate. William and Princess Anne understood this vulnerability perfectly, and they exploited it with lethal precision. By turning Camilla's family away at the gates of Ascot, they were not simply enforcing a dress code or managing a guest list. They were executing a public demonstration of financial and structural reality. They used the strict bylaws of the Jockey Club and the sovereign's private protocols to remind Camilla that she is essentially a temporary tenant within the royal apparatus. The land they walk on, the enclosures they wish to occupy, and the administrative payrolls they desperately tried to infiltrate all belong to a system that William now firmly controls. The sudden eviction from the royal box was forensic proof that her family's access to the crown's prestige was a temporary leasehold, and that lease had just been permanently revoked. With Camilla's covert strategy completely dismantled, a quiet but profound restoration began taking place inside the exclusive parameters of the royal box. The power dynamic shifted drastically, not through leaked press releases or aggressive public relations campaigns, but through the highly coded visual language of the institution. As the event commenced, viewers and high society insiders noticed a massive, undeniable correction in the royal choreography. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, the women Camilla had systematically tried to erase from the social calendar, were escorted directly into the premier enclosure by Princess Anne herself. They were positioned visibly and prominently among the senior working royals, an unassailable wall of direct bloodline descendants reclaiming their rightful territory. That specific detail matters immensely. In the highly scrutinized world of royal maneuvering, physical placement is the ultimate currency. To have the king's sister intentionally flank the bloodline princesses in the exact space Camilla had tried to steal for her own children was a bloodless, devastating rebuke. It communicated a clear message to every aristocrat, politician, and staff member in attendance. The era of unauthorized institutional erasure had been terminated. The natural order had been restored by the true architects of the monarchy's future, and the perimeter was now completely secured against external commercial ambition. While this silent execution was playing out on the manicured lawns of Ascot, the broader institutional shift was pointing directly toward Catherine, Princess of Wales. Catherine did not need to be physically present at the gates to enforce this new reality. She had already earned her absolute centrality through the kind of quiet, uncomplaining sacrifice that defines true royal duty. While Camilla was desperately reaching for permanent relevance through administrative tricks, Catherine was securing the future of the monarchy with untouchable grace and agonizing personal endurance. William's ruthless defense of the royal box was at its core, a fiercely protective shield raised around his wife and the enduring memory of his mother, Princess Diana. It was William ensuring that the woman who actually bled for the institution would never be leapfrogged by a corporate strategy disguised as royal evolution. The profound tragedy of Camilla's blind ambition is that she spent her entire life trying to conquer an ancient institution by manipulating its guest lists and rewriting its internal protocols. She completely failed to understand that absolute power cannot be borrowed from a transitional king. It must be earned through the kind of silent, unwavering endurance that William, Catherine, and Princess Anne have spent decades perfecting. The monarchy is not a social club that can be infiltrated through strategic seating arrangements. It is a cold, enduring administrative machine designed specifically to consume personal desires and protect its own survival at all costs. The illusion is finally over. The long game has been played, and the trap has definitively snapped shut. As the British monarchy prepares to cross the threshold into its next era, Camilla is being forced to watch the future unfold from the outside looking in. She may continue to wear the crown for now, smiling for the cameras and waving from balconies, but she is presiding over an entirely empty empire. The access she craved is denied, the ledgers are permanently closed, and her ultimate institutional reckoning has already been executed in the absolute silence of the palace corridors. Thank you for watching. If you found this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics and silent retaliation of the royal family insightful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Let me know in the comments below how you think the monarchy will look when Prince William officially takes full control, and I will see you in the next analysis.